with the George Memorial Library, and today I'm talking about the old abandoned railroad bridge over the Brazos River near Simonton. Not much today remains of the old rail line. Other than the bridge, there is the old Simonton depot, which today is a private residence. The San Antonio and Aransas Pass Railway Company, known as the SAP or SAAP, was developed by Uriah Lott, a San Antonio businessman, as a direct route from San Antonio to Aransas Bay on the Gulf Coast, about 135 miles. It was chartered on August 28, 1884. It was begun as a local independent in order to connect San Antonio with a closer deep water port than Galveston. Many San Antonio city leaders thought that competition was needed against the Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio Railroad, which was a subsidiary of the Southern Pacific Railway. They thought the S&P's monopoly on coastal rail was expensive and failing to bring prosperity to the city. An additional 176 miles were completed from Yoakum to Waco between 1887 and 1891. 172 miles of track was added in 1887 and 1888 and connected Kennedy and Houston. In 1888, construction began on the line through Fort Bend County. The main towns the line ran through were Simonton, Fulshire, and Clodine. The SAP was operating 688 miles of main track by the end of 1891. From the beginning, the company had problems. First of all, the rails were often laid directly into the ground with little or no ballast. Also, the SAP mostly used lightweight rail rather than heavy rail. This resulted in heat warping the rails, the ties would rot, and rain would undermine the line since there was no proper drainage. The bridges and trestles were mostly made of wood, so they were not durable during flooding. It didn't take long for accidents and derailments to occur. On January 2nd, 1890, a wooden bridge over the Lavaca River at Hallettsville collapsed, resulting in loss of life, the entire train and all its contents. This resulted in many lawsuits. By July of that year, the SAP went into receivership. At this time, the Southern Pacific Railroad began acquiring SAP stock and became the majority holder in 1892. In March 1903, the Texas Railroad Commission ruled that it was illegal for Southern Pacific to acquire the SAP since it gave them a monopoly on coastal travel. On March 25, 1925, the Commission gave Southern Pacific permission to reacquire the SAP, including the section in Fort Bend. The line also lost revenue when in the early 1900s the sugar industry began its decline. Competition from Cuba, Hawaii, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico exported sugar in the form of molasses. Also, sugar refined from sugar beet was a more economical way to produce sugar. Then in 1910, responding to assertions of inhumane treatment, the Texas legislature outlawed convict leasing, removing what had been a reliable source of temporary labor for the growers. In December 1911, a freeze destroyed much of the cane, which resulted in the loss of about 50% of that year's crops. By the mid-1920s, The combined effect of competition, bad weather, and expensive labor had reduced cane production substantially and virtually halted the manufacture of sugar in the area. Southern Pacific sold the line to the Metropolitan Transit Authority of Harris County in 1992. Part of the line remained in use up until 1998. Metro's plans were to build a high-occupancy vehicle lane in the corridor. They bought the right-of-way, including the bridge, with a plan to build commuter rail that was planned to go from Houston to Wallace. The West Park Rail property had a troubled history with Metro. In 1983, it was to hold part of Metro's heavy rail system, and in 1988, it was to hold a piece of the monorail. Both projects were canceled. West Houston business officials had wanted a tollway there for decades and were pleased when the rail plans were canceled. Construction for the West Park Tollway was begun in 2001 and completed in 2005. Metro kept half of the 100-foot wide right-of-way, wide enough for twin light rail tracks, for a possible future rail system. As of right now, there are no plans I was able to locate regarding the fate of the abandoned bridge. I did find on a website that there was also a plan to turn it into a hike and bike trail across the river, but so far I have not located any updates regarding this or any future rail projects. It would be nice if the county can save the bridge and use it for something rather than let it rot and collapse into the river. And thank you for joining me for this brief history of the abandoned railroad bridge near Simonton in Fort Bend. I hope you found it interesting, and if you liked the video, feel free to like and share and subscribe. And if you have any topics you'd like us to cover in the future, please feel free to mention them in the comments. Thank you.